How did you end up together again? Why are we working together? Bill has a remarkable amount of energy. He's a straightforward, honest, enthusiastic professional musician who should have lost his enthusiasm and turned it into cynicism years ago. He's the only man I know who would be prepared to abandon nearly everything he's worked for and earned as a musician and start again. Boy, you can work. How was discipline composed? Well, the idea behind discipline is in the West we have a very peculiar view of music. We have the idea that the musician plays the music and the composer writes the music. It's buttressed and reinforced by a whole body of copyright law. Music can be written down so that one can prove what is the property of any particular writer, and through recording what is the property of any particular player. But really, it doesn't work like that at all. Music plays the musician, and the test of any good music in a practical way is when you can't tell whether the musician is playing the music or the music is playing the musician. Now, it took me a long time to understand that in a real way rather than simply a few good Zen words or some interesting philosophical notion. But if you accept the idea that music is like a good friend who's knocking on the front door and trying to come in to stay with you, and yet you're so busy looking for your friend, rushing around the house, that you can't actually hear the door. So how does the musician open themselves to this relationship with music? And for that, one needs a discipline. That is a body of technique which enables you to develop this relationship with music, where music comes not only to visit occasionally, but comes to live. For the musician, there are three disciplines: the discipline of the hands, by extension the whole health of the body, the calisthenic, the graceful and seemingly effortless combination between the two hands, or in the case of the drummer, the four limbs. The discipline of the head, which has to do with organizing the mind in such a way that the mind can hold on to the overall pattern of the music unfolding so that one's attention can move in time. One expands the present moment of one's attention so one isn't simply playing the bar of music with which one is concerned at the moment, but your attention is spread 16 bars ahead and 16 bars behind, and then to the end of the piece and the beginning of the piece, and then you can develop the present moment where you can see the entire set for the evening. You have a sense of that form. That's part of the discipline of the mind. And then you have the discipline of the heart, which is really touched on in the West. But any system of music training in the East would involve meditation as part of that particular discipline. It's the most subtle area. It's where you begin to develop a real relationship with music. And you take the three disciplines and bring them together. And if they're working, you get an entirely different perception of what music's about. It's where music begins to play the musician. Now, that's the overall idea of discipline. Discipline is, as it says on the album cover, not an end in itself, only a means to an end. Within the piece itself, the guitars are mainly working in fives, which is an entirely natural time signature for a Bulgarian folk singer, but not for an American folk singer who would essentially be working in rock and roll. But since I'm European, I have I have considerable interest in using part of the musical culture of Europe. Also, it makes you think, it makes you drop expectations and approach your music in a different way. If you're used to playing in 4, then to suddenly work in 5, you have to drop your licks and pick up a few new ones. But it takes time. The recent interest in so-called ethnic music, with rock bands in the West playing it, runs into the difficulty that it takes between 12 and 15 years to actually develop the chops to be working in the complex polyrhythms of so-called simple folk musics. For example, if this is R4, you can have a basic 5 on top of it. But can you take it faster? And can you bring your mind to a sufficient point of independence outside that 5 so that your attention can be spread from the immediate moment you're working in to accept an underpinning of 17 beneath your 15 and develop a relationship with it. So you have the hands working in not very difficult technical patterns, but it requires some attention. Your mind is stretched so that you can be listening to what everyone else is doing and have a relationship with it, to hold that overall pattern. And what about the heart? Well, within the particular piece discipline, there's room for spirit, and there's always room for wishing to be in touch with the essential quality of music, the buzz. I mean, these are silly words, but if you imagine Hendrix in the opening chords of Foxy Lady or Purple Haze, then you have a sense of what I'm talking about. In the particular piece discipline, its beginning, there's not as much room for that as there is, for example, in Sheltering Sky, because the structure of the piece is fairly delineated. But nothing's perfect. It's 2.5 out of 3. From Bill's point of view, or rather from my point of view working with Bill in it, one of the best things about it is the African slit drum. It's so limiting for me to play with cymbals, playing 16s. They're taking all my accents. But in terms of the slit drum, the timbre is such that it doesn't get in my way. It chatters away comfortably, but gives me all the space I need for working around it. The influence of Gamblin on King Crimson, I can't speak about the other team. You can't divorce any one part of a system from any of the other parts. And if one's interested in music creating an imaginary society, if you like, a potential society, it means that you have to take the relationships which exist between the notes and carry that over into the relationship, for example, between people. Now, within Gamelin itself, it would be inconceivable to have Gamelin as a natural part of the so-called industrial capitalist culture. The natural product of our particular culture is the star system. You couldn't conceivably have stars within Gamelin. It simply wouldn't be possible. So if you're not particularly fond of the star system, and yet that's your culture, what would happen if you adopted some of the the forms of the gamelan, where you took the idea that everyone has autonomy. You have somewhere between a democracy and a true anarchism, not an anarchy, an anarchism where not so much that there is not any ruler, but that everyone has equal ruling authority, if you like. What would be the effects on the relationship in a band if not only do you share all the money equally, which we do, and you don't have a boss, which we don't? What happened if you use those musical forms which would underpin that kind of society? Well, this is the first piece along those lines. It's adopting the spirit of gamelan. Sometimes we take the vocabulary, I mean, essentially 2 pentatonic scales and a lot of clattering. But it's the spirit of the gamelan which intrigues me. The heart of the gamelan. You don't have to interpret it literally.